In the quiet town of Ridgefield, Massachusetts, there stood a dark and abandoned structure connected to an old church, St. Abraham's Church House. Locals whispered that it was haunted, cursed, and alive in ways no building should be. But the world had almost forgotten its history until one cold night when investigative journalist Ethan Carter received a strange letter sealed with red wax. It carried no name, no address, only a single message. If you want the truth about Father Nathaniel Crowe, come to St. Abraham's Church House midnight. Come alone. Inside the envelope was an old photograph of Father Crowe standing in the church house hallway, and behind him stood a faint, shadowy figure with hollow eyes. The picture looked disturbingly real. Ethan had chased strange mysteries before, but something about this letter felt different. He arrived at Ridgefield close to midnight. The wind was sharp, and the church tower loomed above him like a watchful sentinel. He walked toward the old house. The door, despite being locked for decades, slowly creaked open as he reached for the handle. A cold draft brushed his face. The hallway inside was lined with old portraits of priests and bishops whose painted eyes seemed to follow every move. A soft whisper behind him said, "You shouldn't have come." Ethan turned around, but no one was there. Deeper inside the house, he reached a long corridor. At the far end, a woman in a white dress stood motionless. Before he could react, she floated backward into one of the rooms. Ethan followed, but the room was empty except for a wooden chair in the center. Old ropes hung from the armrests as if someone had been tied up there. On the floor, he found Father Crowe's diary. Most pages were blank, except for one. "The ritual of the seventh gate must never be completed. They will come for me tonight." Suddenly the ropes tightened as if pulled by invisible hands. The room temperature dropped. Ethan fled into the hallway. He entered the library where books began falling off shelves and forming a circle around him. A whisper surrounded him from all directions. "We waited for you, Nathaniel." Ethan shouted that he wasn't Nathaniel, but the whispers ignored him. A Bible on the table flipped open on its own. A red line was drawn under a verse, "And the seventh shall rise when the lost one returns." Ethan felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. When he turned, no one stood behind him. He discovered a staircase leading to the basement. The further he went down, the heavier the air felt. The basement was enormous, much larger than the house above. At the far end was a wooden door engraved with the same strange symbols from the diary. Pushing the door open, he found a dark underground tunnel that led to a stone chamber. In the center of the chamber lay the body of Father Nathaniel Crowe, perfectly preserved, as if he had died only hours ago. Nathaniel's half-open eyes suddenly shifted toward Ethan. His dry lips moved. "You came back to finish what we started." Ethan stepped back in terror. The chamber lights flickered. Ethan saw visions, Nathaniel conducting a ritual with 7 robed figures. A gateway made of shadow and screaming faces had started to open one by one. The figures were dragged inside. Nathaniel locked himself in the chamber, but a creature slipped through before the door shut. A tall, twisted, shadow-like being with glowing eyes. Ethan looked down and noticed the same ritual mark glowing beneath his feet. Nathaniel whispered, "You must finish the ritual, or the seventh will claim you." Footsteps echoed through the tunnel. A tall, distorted figure emerged. Its limbs were too long, its back severely arched. Its face had no features except 2 burning holes for eyes. The seventh. Ethan grabbed the diary and read the Latin lines written by Nathaniel, the banishment spell. The creature shrieked. The chamber shook. Nathaniel's corpse released a horrifying wail. Candles burst. The wind roared violently. Ethan shouted the final line, and everything turned black. He woke outside the church at dawn. The world looked normal again. He tried to convince himself it was a nightmare until he checked his phone. There was a message from an unknown number. "It isn't over. You opened the 7th gate." Ethan looked at his arm. There was a fresh scar, the symbol of the ritual burned into his skin. He drove back to Boston, but shadows followed him everywhere. At night he heard whispers. Objects moved on their own. One night, he examined the old photograph again. It had changed. Now Father Crowe wasn't alone. The shadow creature stood behind him, and behind the creature stood a third figure, a man wearing the same jacket Ethan wore at the church house. Ethan leaned closer. It was his own face, faintly visible in the reflection. Suddenly, a whisper behind him said, "Welcome back, Nathaniel." Before he could turn, darkness swallowed him, and Ethan Carter was never seen again.